first hand to Heath here from Padilla Bay, give you a little orientation of where you're at right now.
Hi everyone, welcome to Padilla Bay. For those of you who haven't been here before, just little logistics. Exit doors over there in the front where you came in, and restrooms are in the back of the building over here if you need them. The center today is closed, but after the meeting, if you're interested in checking out the aquarium or anything, just let us know. Matt here can let you in and show you around if you're interested. And if the weather is nice when you're done, there's a trail down here to the beach or up to the uplands to go for a quick walk if you want to after the meeting.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Welcome everybody. This is as you can see, it's green crab habitat. We've got identified up here, and we're going to talk about European green crab. Thank you for coming, and we have a pretty full agenda for this morning. And this is an important meeting in our minds. There's a lot going on with green crab. We have a transboundary action plan that we've been implementing. There's a lot of things that we need to think about as far as moving forward. Resources are limited for everybody here, so we're all trying to figure out how best to manage these things, as well as coordination. There's a lot of people that are interested in this, and we're doing these regional outreach at this point. And also looking for other formats and how to best address things. Since we're further inland here, some of you may not be from coastal areas. Anybody from a coastal area? I mean, the coast like outside, but not like we're on the coast right here. So there are issues going on the coast, Willapa Bay, Grace Harbor, all the way up to Macaw Bay. We had a really excellent presentation yesterday from Macaw Tribe, who's done some excellent work. They've caught over 2,500 crab in Macaw Bay to date, which is just it's scary. And so, without further ado, let's move forward on the agenda here. So we'll have Emily Grayson from C. Grant.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today, and thank you, Alan, for providing introduction. And thank you, Heath and Padilla Bay for hosting us today. As always, we love coming here because we just roll into the kitchen and pull mugs out. I was saying to Kate that I like this kitchen more than my kitchen at home. It's just really nice and well appointed. So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet, my name's Emily Grayson. I'm the we're gonna stop and we're gonna do a pause, and we're gonna do. We'd love to actually, since we have a small enough group, it'd be nice to do a round of introductions and have everybody just share who they are and what brings them here today. And we're going to pass around. We're going to pass around a mic. So we are recording this session, and so the only way that the stuff gets recorded is if you're speaking into a microphone. So if everyone could make sure to use a microphone today, that would be helpful. And did you actually start the recording, Sean? Okay, so we are actually being recorded actively. If you would like to participate, if you'd like to pass on that, that's okay too. But so feel free to introduce yourself, say what brings you here today, who you're with, and we'll just that way start the conversation. So my name is Emily Grayson. I'm the program manager for crab team at Washington Sea Grant out of the University of Washington.
Hi.
This is the IT guy. Oops. Back to your closet, Sean. Back to your closet. Presumably he's fixing something, but
I think you need to
turn down.
Hello. That's better. Hi, I'm Sean Donald. I'm the IT guy. I'm also a researcher at the University of Washington and the City Green Crab for about the last 20 years or so. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Lindy Hunter. I'm a fisheries technician for Swift Shark.
Matt Nelson, shellfish biologist for Swimmers Tribe.
Claire Cook, also here with Swimmers Tribe.
George Stearns, shellfish biologist of the Field Tribe.
Carl Mueller, a shellfish biologist with the Lummi Nation.
Tegan Moore, I'm from the city of Bellingham. Oral Baldwin with the Whatcom County After School Program.
Kevin Schmidt, County After School.
Nicole Burnett, your Validated Research and Monitoring Team.
Kurt Mountford, Bellingham, and we have Good morning, Tom Woodard, Director of Natural Resources for the Salish Nation.
I'm Francesca Perez, I'm a marine biologist with Stone Wampus Tribe, Fort Susan area.
Jeff Adams, marine ecologist with Washington State.
Kate Lytle, Assistant Director for Programs and Occasional Crab Team, Stakeholder for Washington State.
My name is Erica Blakey. I work in the Aquatics Division of the DNR.
I'm Heather Founderton, I work for Resources for Sustainable Communities.
Elliot Schaefer, work for Echo Shellfish, Salish Bay Manager.
Tom Hawkins, I also work for Echo Shellfish, and I'm the Secretary Manager.
Good morning, I'm Bill Dewey, Director of Public Affairs for Taylor Shellfish Farms, and that's Shellfish Farm, Chutnut Shellfish in Salish Bay. Taylor's crews have found all of the green crab to date in Salish Bay.
I'm Maddie McVeigh, and I'm the Natural Resource AmeriCorps at Padilla.
Hi, I'm Pete Bowman, and I'm part of the research and monitoring team here at Padilla.
Paul Donnell, member of Skagit County Marine Resources Committee.
And I am Al Loyce, Aquatic Invasive Species Unit Manager for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I haven't had no coffee yet.
Thank you for giving us
this
this.
and pass the
Wait, Chelsea would.
Where Chelsea? How did you get?
I'm Chelsea Buffington, I'm the one that emailed you. I'm a scientific technician with the AIS Unit for Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you all for taking the time to introduce yourselves. I think it'll be great to know.
Everybody on the phone?
So I believe, do not have anybody on the phone right now. However, we will have this recording available, be able to make it available if there are other folks you want to share it with it at some point. Not sure exactly what the mechanics of that will be, but if we have your email addresses, we can make sure that you get that. And to that end, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. And if you could make sure to sign in and let us know you were here, that'll help us follow up if there is any. So on to the sort of actual green crab content. So many of you I've been talking with for the past few years about green crab, and most of what I'm going to talk about today is not going to cover sort of the basic history and biology and background of green crab. We can certainly answer those questions and have some information in the back of the room also about that. Most of what we're going to do today is try to bring you up to date on some of the recent efforts that have gone into detection and control of green crab, and then talk about what management in this region might look like going forward, what people are interested in learning, and what people's concerns are, and what resources can be brought to bear. So one thing that I think is helpful to consider from the get-go is that already this effort is hugely collaborative. These are the groups that are working on green crab management and have been for some time already in Washington's inland Salish Sea and as well as on the coast. And so this is a massively collaborative management effort, already, and I only expect it to grow as the, thank you, Keith, as the sort of range of green crab potentially continues to expand. And I think it's helpful at this point, because what you're going to be hearing today are a lot of updates of who's been doing trapping where. I think it's helpful to sort of set up a framework of the management process that a site moves through as green crab are found at them, so that you have a little bit of a framework of where, how to slot in the information that you're getting and how it fits into the big picture of management. So in our region, we are still very much in the early detection rapid response phase of managing European green crab, meaning we're proactively looking for the populations when they're very small, and it's the most likely that we can have a management impact that slows their spread and reduces the chance of negative impacts on habitats that have been seen elsewhere in the world. When a crab is found at a new site, we move into an assessment phase, and then from that assessment phase, making decisions about what management might look like in the near and long term. Early detection across our geography is conducted in a couple of different ways. Our program, Crab Team, has sort of developed into a systematic trapping network. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. But the idea is that there is just basically these stations spread across the geography that give us a little bit of information about where green crab could be showing up and tracking their impacts and population changes over time. It's done in a very systematic way. In addition to that, because we can't cover all 2,500 miles of shoreline at once, there are groups that are working to do opportunistic trapping, looking, and some folks might call this prospecting, looking very intensively with traps in places where green crab haven't yet been detected and where we don't yet have any information on their presence or absence. And so there are a number of groups that also work doing this work. And then last and not least, opportunistic observations from members of the public and managers, as well as shellfish growers included in the sort of the manager category, have been increasingly important to learning about where green crab are. We've been learning over the past few years that some of the identification of green crab can actually be a particular challenge, and but I think as awareness grows and familiarity with green crab in particular becomes just sort of more common, it just saturates the atmosphere, folks are gonna be able to use this as an early detection modality more in the future. So these are the different ways that we might find populations when they're quite small. When a crab is found at a new location, assessments are conducted. So we found maybe 1 or 2 crabs. We're looking to see what is the actual geographic range of a potential population and how many more crabs could potentially be out there. So this usually looks like a 3-day, really extensive trapping effort surrounding the area where the crab was found and trying to get all of the relevant geography that's based on how many man hours and how many traps are available, trying to really hit it quite hard to get as much data as possible about numbers and range of crabs. These are typically now led by WDFW or tribes, if that's the appropriate local jurisdiction, and then often supported by local partners, other managers. Sean and I are often out in the mud as well with traps and advice on those types of efforts too, and occasionally volunteers as well. So from the information that's gathered during these assessment trapping efforts, combined on how many crabs there are, and combined with some information on what resources there are to bring to bear in a locality, some sort of management plan or management action is developed. At minimum, it's really our goal to get some sort of systematic, bring this into the fold of the systematic monitoring network so we can track it alongside all of the other sites. So for instance, in places where green crab are found, if they're not already in our network or near our network, we will add them into we'll add a site there if we can. We have some capacity issues on our program side, but this is sort of an important part of our goal to address. So that's the ideal. The ideal thing is to be able to get systematic information from these sites at minimum. The rest of the actions may depend on how many green crab were actually found during that assessment. In most of the cases to date, although we're going to hear some counterpoints today, very few crabs and sometimes no crabs are found during follow-up trapping assessments that are, 300 trap sets. So in that case, in addition to continued sort of small-scale monitoring through crab team monthly monitoring, often the best practice is to conduct repeat assessments, so do those expanded trapping efforts on some scale once per year, just to keep a close eye. We know green crab can get to that site because they got there at least once. Let's make sure we're not missing some, undiscovered population or a subsequent colonization event. And then in the few cases so far where there has been many crabs discovered during these follow-up assessments, the next step has been to try to pull together as many resources to conduct removal trapping. Trapping is currently the only tool really we have to get rid of these crabs. And so it's labor intensive, it's time intensive, and it requires dedication from local efforts, local management. So the two places so far where this has been fully executed is Dungeness Spit, Dungeness National Wildlife Refuge by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Macaw Bay by Macaw Fisheries Department. And so this is just to give you a little bit of a framework for all of the numbers that you're going to hear and how they slot into these different phases, and each site moves through these ranges as we go. Our program Crab Team, just to give you a few quick updates, is, as I mentioned, focused on this systematic early detection network, and that's really the core of the work that we do. But in addition, we've evolved over the past 5 years to meet other management needs as well, as conducting research, collaborating with researchers to basically answer questions that are related to improving management. I'll talk a little bit more about some of those projects today and what we've learned so far. Collaborating with management, I mentioned participating in assessment efforts, also advising on assessment and management strategies, as well as directly processing data that come out of managers. For instance, crabs being caught at Dungeness Spit, looking at sort of the trends in population and trying to think about what's going on and make some projections about that. We've also done a fair bit of capacity building throughout the region, not just through training our crab team volunteers and monitors, but also by working with WDFW and Fisheries and Oceans Canada on the other side of the Strait of Juan de Fuca to expand management capacity and the ability to conduct trapping for green crab in a way that'll be really efficient across all of the geography, because it is a whole lot of shoreline that we have to look at together. And then lastly, a fair amount of our work is sort of outreach, elevating the visibility of the issue with folks in the region, making sure more people have the information about what to do how to recognize a green crab and what to do if they find one, as well as just that enables us to leverage support for the issue and make sure that, and hopefully free up some resources for the management work that needs to be done. So keeping people up to date through our blog, and as well as just outreach talks, presentations, and other things like that, interactions with the press. So I'm going to talk today mostly about early detection and the research that we have been doing. It's a way to kick it off. So our early detection work is a community science model of conducting sampling that is designed to target European green crab at really low abundances, at least within the tools that we have at this point. So this map shows with the white dots, these are the 56 monitoring sites that we currently have. Some of these have been monitored every month, April through September, since 2015. So we're accruing actually quite a legacy of data. We found that repeat monitoring is really important to these. Even if you monitor for 3 years and don't see any evidence of green crab, you can still have one that shows up in the 4th year. And we have had a few of those. Yeah, Bill.
I'm not sure if you want to take questions or.
I'm happy to.
So there's a white dot on Salish. I'm curious if that's in Salish Bay.
Actually, Alice Bay. So that is the site. That is a site that the Padilla Bay. Oh, I'm sorry. So thank you. Oh, we do have people online now. Great, welcome. So the question was that there's a white dot that's shown on Salish Island, and Bill Dewey was asking about whether what that was. And so that's a monitoring site that was started this year in collaboration with the Padilla Bay NER. They monitor the site. No green crab have been captured there across the 6 months of monitoring they've done so far. So the protocols, the goal here is to have a really protocols that are sensitive for European green crab, detecting them at low abundance to the best of our ability, and also consistently implemented across sites. So this is the grid that we need to be able to rigorously look at population trends and status, as well as impacts of green crab over space and time. Currently, we work with 200 volunteers and 50 staff members from tribes and agencies who conduct the monitoring. Over the past 5 years, we've trained more than 400 people to do this work, and about 250 currently participate. So I want to say here as sort of a caveat that because of the initial charge of Crab Team, the initial funding and management charge, the sites that we have are all currently situated in the Salish Sea. However, as we may hear today, we heard Alan reference that there's growing concern about what's going on the coast. Green crab have been on the coast for at least 20 years, and they haven't really been, they've only been periodically abundant. We're seeing maybe some shifts in those trends, and we're trying to learn more about those and also provide support for the folks on the coast. It's an important discussion that needs to continue to happen. Quick, some benchmarks in terms of the timeline since Crab Team early detection was launched in 2015 in response to finding an established European green crab population in Souk Basin, which is a tiny, very restricted inlet just west of Victoria on Vancouver Island. Crab Team launched early detection in 2015, and the first green crab along Washington's inland shorelines was confirmed from San Juan Island in August of 2016. In 2017, April was the first sort of really large detection that was made, one of those follow-up assessments that found a bunch of crabs at Dungeness Spit. Shortly thereafter, a couple more detections, including another quite large one in Macaw Bay. And 2018, the story was really about expanding capacity within the Salish Sea. So Chelsea's position was added in 2018, hugely expanding the effort that we as a collaborative group could put forth. And in addition, British Columbia expanded their early detection work. They've been monitoring green crab for years, but not really doing a whole lot of early detection work. And so now they're starting to get more information about what's going on in their side of the geography. This year, the big story has certainly been detections particularly in Whatcom County, also in Salish Bay and Chuckanut Bay. And so I think that's going to guide a lot of the conversation today. This is not all of the detections that have taken place. Green crab have been found at about a dozen sites along Washington's inland shoreline, but these are sort of some of the big benchmarks over the past 5 years. So I want to give you a little bit of summary about the effort and how it's grown over time. Here I'm showing you the number of traps total that have been set along Washington's inland shorelines since 2015 that were specifically targeting European green crab. The first year, the bar is so tiny because that was our pilot year and we had something like 7 sites. But we did actually set traps that year, just 84. The orange bars in this case are the number of traps that were set as a part of Crab Team's early detection network. And the gray bars show you how much more effort has been gradually leveraged over the years in collaboration with WDFW and in particular also US Fish and Wildlife Service and other groups that are doing those assessment, prospecting, and response removal trapping. So there's a whole lot of effort that's well beyond what Crab Team can muster that greatly expands the management capacity in the state. This is the number of sites with new detections of European green crab. So when we find a green crab for the first time at a place, it's a new detection. And the orange parts of the bar are the detections that were made as a part of Crab Team monthly monitoring. And the gray parts of the bar are other detections. So, the y-axis there, we're not talking about a lot of new detections each year, although it is increasing. And as I mentioned, in addition to the network continuing to be an important part of finding crabs at new sites, the capacity of just everybody else working in the state is increasing to find green crab when they're present. So we're potentially finding more because we're looking a lot harder. We're potentially finding more because there are more, and it's a little bit difficult to disentangle those, and both things are probably happening. This is the total number of green crabs that are captured, have been captured each year since 2015, starting with 0. And again, the orange is the numbers that are captured as part of the early detection work, which is quite small, and that's not a surprise. The early detection work is not designed to remove green crab. The vast majority of the removal work happens after crabs are detected first. And if we were seeing a whole lot more crabs captured across the early detection network, that would mean that because it's systematic, that would mean that we were really seeing a huge signal of sort of population explosion. So I am really glad that those orange bars are quite small, to be honest. To put this all in context, especially with the major increase in 2017, and I'll show you a little bit more detail on that in a second. We're still looking really, really hard to find a relatively small number of green crabs. This is averaged over the entire Washington portion of the Salish Sea, where we have to set about 100 traps before we catch 1 to 2 crabs. Now, locally, drilling into site by site basis, that's going to vary substantially, and that's some information that Chelsea's going to be able to share with you, as well as some of the other folks who are speaking today. But I just want to say that when we bring up an average trap, it's mostly native species, and that's great, and that's the way we want it to stay. I was just at a conference in Montreal talking to some folks from the East Coast, and when they set a Fukui trap out there, they're coming up, they don't even count the green crabs in them. They weigh the green crabs because it's too cumbersome to count them. There's too many of them. So that's not our situation yet, and that's why when we talk about still being in an early detection and rapid response phase, that's what we're talking about. A little bit more detail, I want to take this figure and give you a little bit more specific information on where the green crabs have come from. This figure shows the bars are broken out by color based on the origin of the crabs, the geographic origin of the crabs. And there's a couple things I want to point out. One is that most of the crabs are coming from a relatively small number of locations. Most of the sites where we find green crab, we have found fewer than 10 green crab over thousands of traps of looking. We've set a total of more than 20,000 traps since 2015 looking for green crab. The other thing I want to point out is that sites where we detect green crab for the first time, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see the population take off at that site. So for instance, if you look at Padilla Bay, in 2016, 4 were found total. The next year, 2 were found, and they haven't been found in Padilla Bay since, at least that anyone's told me. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now's not the time, maybe, but and here's you can see also, so Dungeness Spit in the blue bars has been executing an immense amount of effort over the last 3 years to remove green crab, and it's been a little bit gratifying to see the total number removed go down, and their catch per unit effort is also not increasing, which is good. Of course, the big story this year will be the sort of relatively large number of green crab found in Whatcom County. I sort of aggregated all of Whatcom County since there were several detection locations this year. Okay, so that's sort of a status snapshot. I want to just give you a little bit of information of some of the research that we've been doing over the past several years to learn about, in particular, where green crab are coming from and how are they getting around the Salish Sea. This map shows the sort of just big dots on detection everywhere green crab have been noted at least once since 2015, not necessarily established populations as I showed you on that last slide, including on the DFO side. The absence here is, this is the location, Souk Basin, where there's been a hardy established population since at least 2012. And so that was what actually initially launched concerns about green crab in the Salish Sea. So to answer this question about how green crabs could be moving around the Salish Sea, we first had to consider how they could have gotten here in the first place. We first, I guess I should point out that the DFO originally inferred through research, and this is backed up with genetic information we have now, that green crab were accidentally introduced to that tiny little bathtub Souk Basin by movement of mussels for biotoxin monitoring from an infested cove on the north end of Vancouver Island, the northwest side of Vancouver Island. And so over the first few years, as we started seeing green crab show up, based on their size, the timing, and their location, we really don't think that it's likely that humans are the ones that have brought green crabs into, say Padilla Bay and these other locations. And so it's most likely in that case that they're getting moved around as larvae, they're getting washed around as larvae. So our job has been to figure out how the populations are moving around, where they're coming from, moving to, and see if that gives us any information about how we might manage them. So we've been working on 2 projects, one of which is a collaboration with Carolyn Teepolt, who's a geneticist at Woods Hole in Massachusetts. She's probably the person who knows more about green crab genetics on the West Coast than anyone else, even though she's currently on the East Coast. She comes out here all the time. Hopefully you get a chance to meet her. And we also did a project with Elizabeth Brazil, who's in Parker McCrady's lab at UW Oceanography, doing some particle dispersal modeling using his live ocean model, which is an ocean simulated model that enables us to drop electronic crabs in there, crab larvae in there, and see where they go from and to. So we can answer a lot more questions about the specifics of that, but what we have learned is that if we think about the populations on the coast, such as Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor, California, Oregon, Barkley Sound has a robust population. Larvae, for a larva to travel from one of those populations into the Salish Sea is rare, but it can happen. It seems to be coincident with, depending on distance, it seems to be coincident with some particular current reversals that can happen. And we can see that larvae can even get into the Salish Sea from as far as Coos Bay within a reasonable developmental window. However, contrary to what we thought, larvae that may be being released from Souk Basin are not necessarily flooding the Salish Sea. And that's largely because the currents from the Fraser and other riverine inputs move water out on the north side of the strait. So things particularly that are on the north side of the strait end up getting washed out. So in fact, from genetic work, green crab from Souk Basin have been found in Macaw Bay and I think Yaquina Bay as well. So green crabs are largely getting washed out. They can get in, there can, as I mentioned, be these reversals, but it's not necessarily more likely that a crab released or larva released from this location gets into the eastern Salish Sea at a time at which the crab would be old enough to settle than it is from Barkley Sound or Willapa, et cetera. So that was super surprising for us anyway. I'll just put that out there. We have learned that green crabs in Souk Basin are a genetic subset of the crab populations on the West Coast as a whole. So the crab populations on the West Coast as a whole are really genetically well mixed. It can be difficult to distinguish them. However, Souk Basin is a really bottlenecked population that has a distinctive genetic signature, but we also can tell that the crabs did come from one of the outer coast populations at some point based on the fact that it's a subset of the genetic variation present in the whole coastal population. Now, we have so far only tested green crab in terms of Washington Salish Sea. The only crabs we've tested are the ones from Dungeness Spit. Those crabs are not genetically similar to the crabs from Souk Basin. They look like the crabs from the not just Washington, but all of the outer coast. Since we can't tell those coastal populations apart, we don't necessarily know if crabs at Dungeness Spit came from Grays Harbor. They could have come from Macaw Bay. We can't tell that, but we can tell that they actually didn't come from Souk Basin. That was another surprise to us. One thing I want to point out is we only know that about crabs from Dungeness Spit. This work is ongoing. Sean and I and crab team are on an NSF-funded project to continue the genetic work, and the most recent batch of samples we have sent to Carolyn for analysis come from Whatcom County in particular, as well as a few other sites. And we hope to have those results by early 2020. So the work is ongoing. We're hoping to learn as much as we can from every crab that we get, but it also takes time to do some of this work. And so we're curious about whether these crabs could be coming from somewhere else. Either it may not be coming from the coast, but may be coming from Souk. And so that's sort of the next question we're looking at addressing. So we have ongoing research questions, including funded work to look at eDNA as an early detection possibility and screening the crabs that we're collecting for parasites as well. Our crabs green crab here are really clean, and they have historically been, which makes them more successful here. We're wondering if that could change over time as well. And then interested in other projects that help us figure out how much trapping one needs to do, what green crabs might be eating, the ones that we're catching, and whether we can improve the ocean modeling work that we've done so far to build predictive models or answer other questions about how green crabs might be moving around. So I want to, again, thank everybody who participates in the collaborative management, and I think probably we'll take some questions later during the discussion period, or if there's questions as we transition slides, I can answer a few now. For goodness sake, Sean. Thank you.
So as the slides are being transitioned, I was just realizing that we're not really talking too much about the biology or the risk of green crab. We're assuming that you're, as an audience, you understand those risks, but maybe we are, since we've been doing this for a few years, but if you're not really understanding what are the risks of green crab, please ask. It's just, we were thinking like, let's just show what we've been doing here and not really thinking about, people might say, I really don't think those things are risky. What's your problem? So, offering that up. Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
So I have a question not related to your comment, but I'm curious, as part of the research or monitoring, you're recording what tide elevation you're tracking.
Yeah, so all of the crabs are actually, the question too for folks online. So the question was if we're recording tidal elevation when crabs are captured. When we find crabs, we record everything. We record X geographic coordinates down to 7 decimal places, which enables us to go back and get as much information in addition to tidal elevation as possible. These are largely intertidal crabs, although their habitat use can change over the course of the year seasons. And so most of the sites where we find them are marsh channels that are relatively high elevation, I would say +4 or higher. And there are some certain exceptions to that, Salish Bay being one of them. I would be curious to ask Sean what the deepest elevation you would expect to see that.
Well, here on this coast, we just don't really find them very deep at all. I mean, I don't think I've never recorded anything deeper than about 15 feet, and that was at a high tide. And so I think there are, of course, going to be exceptions, and it's probably going to be very dependent on the water body, sort of the local geography. On the East Coast, and certainly within a native range, they can get down to 50 feet or more, but they are more common in intertidal areas. It's just the nature of their biology.
So the reason I ask is that we have found a deep intertidal in Sandwich, which was my understanding uncommon and troubling. So that's where our shellfish resources are most full.
Certainly, yeah. So the comment from Bill is that they were found in deeper intertidal areas in Sandwich. And we do see some seasonal patterns. So certainly in the winter time, they do tend to be found deeper. And in fact, on the coast, we are seeing them, or historically, over the last 20 years, when they've been found in the winter time, typically they're found by shellfish growers and usually within pallets and bags and things like that that are stored in slightly deeper intertidal areas. That's sort of the general pattern. Like if your comment is important because as this invasion expands, we have to be aware of and considering the fact that these animals can live in a wider range of conditions than we are currently seeing them.
All right. So again, my name is Maddie McKay, and I'm the Natural Resource AmeriCorps at Padilla Bay. And I will be talking about our green crab trapping season, as well as the history of our trapping in Padilla Bay. So this is a really big table, and the main thing that I want you to take away from this is, first of all, that we've been trapping since 2001, and also that we have 3 different methods that we have been using since then. So when we started in 2001, it was part of the Marine Invasive Species Monitoring Program, which I believe was with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. When we were doing that trapping, it was at 3 different sites every year using minnow traps. When we lost funding for that in 2008, we continued using that method in a modified version, using the same sites, but doing them rotating through those 3 sites between years. And we also switched to Fukui traps. And in 2016 is when we found the first green crab in Padilla Bay, which is when we switched over to our monthly monitoring with the Washington Sea Grant. So we started with 4 monthly monitoring sites. So these are all of our sites right here. And in 2019, we have added 2 more. So that one in Alice Bay, and we've also added a rotating site that we decide on a month-to-month basis. So you'll also see now we use both traps, and our number that we set has significantly increased. So this map shows our 3 original sites that we were sampling at from 2001 to 2016. This is Bayview, this is Indian Slough, and this is Sullivan Minor. And now that we're part of Washington Sea Grant, these are our 5 monthly monitoring sites, and not pictured is our rotating site that, again, we decide on a month-to-month basis. So specifically for European green crab, we have this timeline, like I said, starting in 2016. So in September, one of our education staff found one, I believe, just on the beach underneath our observation deck. So that happened right there. Because of that, we did a 2-day rapid response where 3 more green crabs were found. So this represents the 4 total that we found here in 2016. In 2017, again, which is when we started our 4 monthly monitoring sites, we found 1 more at our northernmost monitoring site, as well as a partial at Big Indian Slough. During 2017, we did another extensive eelgrass survey, and no European green crabs were found during that survey. In 2019, there were 2 more extensive trapping surveys, one done by us and also one done by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which resulted in no green crabs being found. And that brings us to our current season in 2019. Taylor Shellfish found 3 European green crabs in Salish Bay in January, which is why we added our site in Alice Bay as well as our rotating site to gain some more ground. We did not find any this season, but Taylor Shellfish did find another in Salish Bay in August. So from all of this, we have a lot of data that we can work with. So I made this just as a quick example of something that we could consider doing with the data. I did an analysis with the Dungeness amounts, so the average Dungeness that we were finding per trap starting in 2001. So again, 2017 through 2019 are the only years that we have used both traps. But I think this is a good example because we can potentially use this data to start looking at differences in the traps and maybe comparing that to sizes of the prey species that we are capturing during our trapping seasons. So looking forward, we again have a lot of data. So we have some questions that we would like to look further into, and we also want to know what everyone else thinks, and if anyone has any good ideas of what we could do with our data that would be beneficial, then we could definitely talk about that. But some things in particular that we are thinking about are comparing the habitat differences in the potential prey species. So looking at channel sites versus marsh sites, and maybe focusing more on hairy shore crabs, or looking at the Dungeness as well. And from this, we can quantify the variability that we see in the prey species. We are also considering doing more intensive trapping. So we have done the eelgrass trapping before in the summer, but we're thinking possibly in winter months, they could be using the eelgrass as shelter. As we know in Salish Bay, that's when they were found, was in January. So looking at different seasons to do the intensive and extensive trapping. And also looking at these differences between the Fukui and the minnow traps. Besides data, we're hoping to get more volunteer engagement. So if anyone has experience using volunteers and they do something other than the monthly monitoring sites with the volunteers, then let us know, because that's something we're interested in. Potentially doing molt surveys, just so that we can get more ground and seeing if we find any molts that we aren't finding at our monthly monitoring sites. And something else that we have been considering is coordinating with other NERs and reserves. So those that have experience maybe trapping green crabs in a different way, getting some of their results and seeing how their methods differ and if they're any more successful and just looking at those differences. So from all this, if anyone has any ideas, we can talk about it in the discussion, but basically we have a lot of data that we want to start analyzing and looking at trends between traps and between these prey species and their habitats. So yeah, and that's it.
Where's mine? That one? Oh, okay. Are we just doing present, or do we have to do the slideshow? Okay. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Chelsea with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm going to talk to you about our trapping that we've done this year and a little quick summary of last year. So we're going to have a sighting map, take it with a grain of salt. I'll tell you about the different type of trapping assessments that we conduct. Like I said, the effort from last year and this year, and a quick update from our coastal growers and what we're seeing in Willapa and Grays Harbor. So as I said, take this map with a grain of salt. It's always changing. It's never right. So like macaw, they're probably higher than that at the moment. And this map shows no effort. So these are just the counts. So they don't show abundance. They don't show any effort that people are putting towards this. The types of trapping assessments that we conduct, I have done different trap studies, not too much with bait, but we have in the past with Fish and Wildlife, different locations, and hopefully soon we'll be doing different winter trapping assessments and locations. We do primarily early detection monitoring, and that's the same as Washington Seagrat said earlier, but we do really intensive, extensive early detections. Typically it's one site per the location that we get access to. So I take as many traps as I can physically carry with me, usually over 100 or so. And from this photo, you can tell it's actually quite a bit of effort. And we jam pack that dry bag with minnow traps as much as I can. We do expanded assessments, working with different tribes and other places to go to current Washington Sea Grant monitoring sites and expand efforts in that area, because typically the monitoring sites have about 6 traps that they set, and like I said, we take about 100 out and do what we can. Follow-up assessments of places where green crabs have been trapped before, and then rapid responses to new detections. So last year we sampled about 42 sites and set about 1,300 traps. We only captured 4 green crab, and we did about 4 rapid responses and 3 follow-up expanded assessments. I'm not going to go into detail about those, but I will go into detail about this year's. So we did about 59 sites this year, and that's including all of the sites that we did at Drayton Harbor. The number of traps that we've deployed this year are about 1,900. We've captured 43 green crabs this year, so up from 4 last year is pretty terrifying. We have done about 4 rapid responses, 2 of those being towards the end of the season, and we've conducted about 4 follow-up expanded assessments. So trap testing, went to macaw, thankfully from Adrian Ekmajian from the fisheries department there. She let me come out and try some pitfall traps. These are just small tomato sauce sized cans that I grabbed from a Hispanic restaurant. And you dig a hole, put them in there so they're flush with the surface, and you're just doing passive trapping to see if there's some migration patterns going on in certain areas where you think they might be abundant. We caught 1 small male crab there, and that photo there shows a molted crab that we captured by hand while I was out there. The orange crab is actually the molt, and the yellow is a very soft green crab. Not green at all. So early detection, this year we went to South Puget Sound, Hood Canal, to places where trapping has not been conducted before. Gorse Lagoon, Lynch Cove, and Wallachet Bay. Did not find any green crabs, and we set about 128 traps. Skagit Bay, which has a lot of habitat and a lot of questions about that area. We set about 152 traps. I worked with the DNR's noxious weed group out there, and they were so fun to work with, and they're used to that kind of habitat, so it was really easy to run around the flats with them. No green crab. So Pished, we worked with Washington State Grant and the Elwha Clallam tribe. I'm glad I remembered to make this slide last night, because Pished, Lower Elwha presented on this yesterday. So this is kind of what the effort looks like when you're working with as many people as you can get your hands on. We set over 311 trap sets. We divided into 3 teams, and we set all over the place. The section right in the middle, I'm gonna use this right here, that's generally where the Sea Grant monthly monitoring site is, and that's why we skipped that. Because they do monthly monitoring, so we figured we'd put more traps in places that haven't been trapped before. No green crab. Some other early detections, we work with Jefferson and, or Jamestown Squam tribe a lot and do trapping in Jefferson and Clallam counties. We did Squim Bay, Discovery Bay, Oak Bay, Indian Island, where they have a portage canal. We went to, so these are the places we went. There's a map there of kind of the distance between. It's actually pretty easy to get between those 2 sites, so you can set all those in a trapping session. We set about 142 traps, did not get any green crab. This year we did also respond to a detection at Squim Bay by Neil Harrington. I can't remember the dates, but I think in May he found a large male about 80 millimeters that red, oh, I put the dates on there. The red dot there at the end of that spit. And that was the first trap that he had checked that day, and he thought it was gonna be a crazy day after that, but that was the one that he caught. When we went back out, we set traps up here in this area where he had never really set traps before that extensively. It was a really low tide, about a -2, so we were able to go into the eelgrass beds, and we set as many traps as we could down that way and worked up. And then one day we set traps right by the tribal center outside the window. We did not catch any green crab, which was great to hear, but unfortunately in June there was another report of a large male green crab in the Olympia oyster restoration area. Again, these male crabs were large, and they could have been from the same cohort where they found a green crab in 2017. This year we also went to San Juan Island, because why would you not, to do a follow-up assessment. We set traps in similar places that we have in the past. Westcott Bay Marsh, Henry Island, Roach Harbor, and Davidson Head. We set about 340 traps. We're split into 2 teams. We have to have a boat operator to get to Henry Island. And we caught, Sea Grant caught 1 green crab in the typical place where they've caught them before. And we were able to expand our efforts to this area this year to see if there was something going on there that we were unaware of, but fortunately there was just the 1 green crab that we captured. This year I also responded to a preyed upon crab in Bellingham Bay, Squalicum Harbor. And I set traps in Chuckanut Bay because there was a big question there. Got as much land access that I could get. Sea Grant has a monthly monitoring site right here. It's a little bit rockier. They catch a lot of red rocks in that area. And we wanted to set traps across the whole bay if we could. We set about 171 traps. And don't listen to or pay attention to this right here. That's just the map that I have at the moment. This red dot is where a green crab was found, and this photo above is the pool that it was found in. I know that Whatcom County and MRC do water quality testing there, and unfortunately it has a high fecal content, so one of those things to be aware of when you're out in the field, to have hand sanitizer, gloves, different things to protect yourself. And so I wanted to go back and set traps in this marked area later on. So later in that month, I found private property owners and got access to this area. We set traps all the way up in this section because there's a lot of marsh type of habitat that you see here in this photo. We set about 80 traps and we did not catch any green crabs, so that is good for us. So these are the sites where green crab were detected by us this year. Just a quick little summary of that. This map was made a couple days ago, so take it with a grain of salt as well. These are all the sites that have been trapped for green crab in the state of Washington. I just put 1 dot per Willapa, Grace Harbor, and I know that there was some trapping done in the Columbia River estuary back in the early onset of the invasion. I couldn't tell you how many sites there are, but there's quite a few. And the catch per unit effort for the places where green crab have been captured, and we can do some sort of catch per unit effort. This is per 100 traps. As Emily Grayson might help me point out, but in Salish Bay, this is not per trap. This is hand opportunistic captures, but we wanted to be able to put that on the map so people could get kind of a sense of what's going on in the area. And these numbers are incorrect already too, so don't pay attention to those. So quickly, a coastal update. We have Willapa Bay. These red dots are from 2015 to the present. Some of our hot spots here are Stackpole along, this is where a lot of the trapping in the late 1990s happened. And Andrea Randall, who gets funded from Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, also goes out here and once a year, and she'll check pitfall traps and set minnow crayfish traps. This year, I think it was 12 crayfish traps and 7 pitfall traps, and she captured 38 green crab. And I couldn't tell you how many per the pitfall traps, but that's substantial because those are passive trappings that I was talking about. And these are 5-gallon buckets buried into the substrate that are left there year round. At Willapa Bay, we have over 1,500 crabs reported, mostly males. And we work closely with the growers out there, or I talk to them about once a month to see what's going on with them. And then in Grace Harbor, this is alarming to me personally. I talk with Brady's Oysters pretty often, and these are the only reports since 2015 that we're getting for Grace Harbor. This is where Brady's Oysters is, and he has reported over 150 so far this year, mostly females, over 100. And they are typically here in this area where they have their harvest baskets, their seed pallets, and their wet storage region. This year alone, they gave me 7 gravid females. And then recently we got a little hit from someone that worked on green crab back in '98 of a green crab being caught in a set gill net in Cosmopolis. And we're trying to follow up on that. So this is a quick where to report a sighting. I don't know if we're just gonna jump right into the next presentation if you want to. So, because it kind of ties into everything that we've been doing here. So next, Emily and I are going to talk about Drayton Harbor in particular.
Yeah. So the question was about the lowest salinity we found them in so far. So green crab can survive nearly entirely fresh water, and they can survive even lower salinities for short periods of time. And so I'm curious, actually, I think the most relevant site would be to learn more about Macaw Bay, where the river estuaries where they're catching green crab in are actually, they can be relatively fresh. However, there's no glacier drainage in those estuaries. So the seasonal inputs we get in sort of inland glacier-fed rivers are slightly different in sort of the regime. But where the salinity, where the salt wedge goes quite far up into estuaries, green crab can survive further up than you might expect because of the fact that they will wait out the really fresh periods of when the tide drops and it's fully fresh. They'll wait those out outside of the water because they're essentially able to burrow into mud banks or maintain sort of micro refugia until the tide comes back in. So I don't, and because our sites experience really dramatically fluctuating salinity regimes, it's hard to say what the sort of in terms of a crab that was captured, what was the lowest salinity. But I would say, it's broader than you might expect for if you're thinking about Dungeness crab or rock crab.
Yeah, an example of that is the green crab that Neil found this year in his trap. The crabs that were in the trap with it were dead from osmotic pressures. So, and the green crab was feisty and alive. So right now, Emily and I are going to talk about Drayton Harbor, since a lot of you are concerned with that area, and it's the latest discovery that we've had for our departments. We work really closely together, probably year-round, winter, everything. So Drayton Harbor, that is on the Canadian border. It's our last water body right up at the top. Semiahmoo Bay is on the outside, shared waters with the Canadian border. Right there is the marina. Drayton Harbor Oyster Company, I believe, is right in the center part of that. I never really did get a total understanding of where their operations are held. The two creeks in question that we've done are Dakota Creek and California Creek. So a little bit about Drayton Harbor. There was shellfish pollution since 1988. In 1999, the harbor closed to shellfish harvesting, and the Drayton Harbor Oyster Company moved on to other things. And I think, can't remember his name, Mark and Steve Seymour, and then there was Jeff Menzies, were the operators during that time. Puget Sound Restoration Fund was developed in 1997 by Betsy Peabody, and she wanted to work closely on a project in Drayton Harbor to see about the pollution sources and if they could get that harbor water quality to be better. In 2001, they worked closely with Jeff Menzies to create the Drayton Harbor Oyster Community Oyster Farm. And then in 2004, they were able to reclassify 575 acres of Drayton Harbor as conditionally approved, and they were open seasonally for harvesting. And then in 2015, Drayton Harbor Oyster Company came back and started doing their shellfish operation again. And then in 2016, the harbor opened completely for year-round shellfish harvesting. So that was really great on their part. And then in 2019 comes us.
Well, and even going back before 2019, Crab Team has actually been monitoring in Drayton Harbor, one site at in California Creek here down at the south end since 2017. We've had a crew of volunteers working there. That's the result. There's been 17 sampling efforts, small number of traps, 6 traps in each effort. That's 102 trap sets, and no European green crab had been trapped at that site across any of these monthly monitoring sites. I want to point out also that this is a challenging monitoring site. We thought it was really important to get something up near the border to get an idea of spread, but this is a site where interns from resources, as well as some folks have been, we'll look at the site and they're like, nah, I'm not doing that. So it's been a challenging site to staff in terms of volunteers because it's super muddy. And it's, thankfully these ladies were super up for it. But we thought it was important, given its proximity to shellfish resources in Canada, to make sure it was monitored. So like I said, no green crab were trapped from 2017 to present, including the final month of sampling this year in 2019. However, in August, the volunteers who do the trapping work there were on a beach walk for COAST, the Dead Seabird Survey, another project they volunteer with, and found 2 molts on different days. So they were looking for dead seabirds and they found a green crab molt, but because they knew how to recognize green crab, they reported it to us. Just after that, the final monthly monitoring effort for Crab Team of the year is in September. And during their actual molt survey, where they systematically search for molts, they did find a green crab molt at the California Creek site. And I just want to point out, for scale, this is an extremely small molt. I don't have any sort of scale bar in there for reference, so I don't know how big it was, but you can see the sort of like barcode here. So the fact that they were able to even find this molt in amongst all of the native hairy shore crabs was to my mind, I was quite impressed.
So while those molts were being discovered, I started planning to do a rapid response in the area. I came up with 5 sites along in the areas where I could easily access the properties. I worked closely with Whatcom Land Trust, City of Blaine, and the Port of Bellingham. So we have a site, Semiahmoo Bay site on the outside of the harbor, we have the Marina boat launch, and that was just right next to the boat launch. I set some traps in the mouth of Dakota Creek, California Creek, at the monitoring site, as well as upstream of the monitoring site, as far as I could go up to the Whatcom Land Trust property. And I set some traps in this midpoint where a green crab was actually found on the coast, or on the water shoreline there. I set 178 traps, and we discovered 17 green crab. Pretty equal distribution of 8 males and 9 females. They were all smaller than 50 millimeters, which indicates young of the year. So during that trapping effort, I had 9.5 green crabs per 100 traps. And what just popped up there shows where the majority of the green crabs were found, or the numbers that I found. At that midpoint, I just want to say I put 8 traps out there and I caught 6 crabs. So that was a little alarming to myself. Here's some photos. That green crab right in the middle is tiny, just showing you I believe Carl actually took that photo. Thank you, Carl. And then where this area right here is the outside of in the Semiahmoo Bay, and the Canadian border is over here. And this is also another photo of the California Creek monthly monitoring site. From that information, we talked with Washington Sea Grant, and we had a meeting, and we decided we're going to go out one more time before the season was over. And we wanted to work up the 2 creeks in question. Oh, this is you.
That's right. Doing great. So yeah, the goal of this was really, we had found them much more widespread than we had hoped to find them. And seeing them as far as, outside of the harbor, as well as in all of these creek areas, we really wanted to see, this sort of gets at your question, Heather, of how far up these creeks they actually go. So our goal was to look at sort of a salinity gradient, or just essentially try to wrap our arms around how widespread they are. These estuaries are the sort of primo green crab habitat within Drayton Harbor. Drayton Harbor as a whole is quite shallow, but there's not much of the protective structure. So green crab don't necessarily spend a lot of time in really open tide flat habitats. They usually are associated with protective structure. Sometimes that's emergent vegetation. Sometimes that's sort of the little pedestal marsh. Sometimes it's pilings, and you'll see photos of the different habitats that Chelsea's taken of places where she's found green crab. And that's another reason why it's sort of, they can be aggregated around shellfish beds, is because that offers protective structure as well as food. Potentially. So most of our trapping was concentrated in these areas, partially where we had already found green crab, but much further up, as well as some new areas. Much of this habitat, however, is very difficult to trap and not necessarily the best for green crab. So if they were to be rare, it's going to be even less likely we would find them there. So our question was how far upstream they go. A big barrier that we ran into, and something that took us several weeks to work through, had to do with property access. Because these are intertidal traps, they're best set during low tide from shore. And so that requires working with property owners, figuring out who the property owners are, and then trying to figure out if we can contact them to get permission to go across their property and set traps. And so actually Chelsea became an investigative journalist and learned how to use Google and other parcel maps to great efficacy to get us access to a lot of these properties. And we have a lot of folks to thanks for that. Trapping effort ran from October 8th through 10th, and this is a couple of photos to show you why it gets really difficult to trap even in October in the shoulder season, which this is us out at pre-dawn with headlamps doing some collaborative planning. That's Chelsea on the left and me on the right. We did have support from some really excellent and adventurous volunteers. These assessment trapping efforts are extra dynamic and responsive, and so it's not always something that volunteers are interested in doing, because it does involve carrying a lot of gear over terrain we haven't ever necessarily traversed. So we're kind of troubleshooting on the fly, and that's not always something that they're game for. But these guys were great, and I also want to point out that it was really cold. And so we actually had ice on our traps and frost on our traps. So these are the times of year when it's getting tricky to trap for green crab. It's not that you won't necessarily ever catch a green crab during this time of year in a baited trap. We think that the capture rates go down at this time of year because they're less active and they're migrating into protective habitat where their metabolisms are lower, so they don't need to eat as frequently. They're still potentially around, but you're less likely to catch one in a baited trap in colder months than you are doing other sorts of searches. For instance, moving shellfish product around puts you in overlap with the location of where green crabs might be, as well as doing the activities that might be likely to find them. So that's one reason why when green crab are rare, we don't do a lot of trapping during the winter at this point. Oh, sorry, this is me too. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, Sean and I went up and we worked with some volunteers, including Heather, who's here today, set 114, this is the California Creek portion of the response, showing the yellow dots here are all the places that traps were set that did not have any green crab in them. The red dots are places where we did capture green crab. So this is the monthly monitoring site that Crab Team has been looking at since 2017, and this is, I think, one of the places where green crab were more concentrated within Drayton Harbor. But we did find three additional individuals here, and then one quite far up the creek. But there is a point at which the habitat suitability does decline for green crab. Another thing to point out is in these creek systems, you might see a seasonal signal based on the salinity regime, the tide regime, and the freshwater input regime, and where you find how far up a creek you find European green crab. Most of the crabs we captured were young of the year, which was indicated to us this is a relatively recent event. However, the mults that were found were definitely at least second-year crabs. And Chelsea will be on that.
And so I was in charge of doing the Dakota Creek and also the marina area again, and some pillars that from overhead photos looked promising to go to. Didn't realize there was more structure there than there was in the photos. So we did 6 main sites with 11 what I'm calling microsites within those areas. We set 153 traps. I just want to say I worked with Alex Alexander, who used to work, I believe, here. And he is amazing on the mud. He kind of kicked my butt at it. I was like, slow down. And so Dakota Creek, we only turned up 1 green crab, 1 female underneath the I-5 bridge. But when we thought we were in the clear, and then we went over to the marina and we started checking the traps along the breakwater, and we started finding crab after crab after crab, and we were like, oh no. Fortunately though, we didn't catch any green crab within the marina. There seemed to be a lot of juvenile Dungeness and some other species in there, but no green crab. And then when we set at the pillars, we did find 7 male green crab. So this is all together, both sites combined, and where green crab were being found, and this includes the previous rapid response as well. So we surveyed 23 sites. We set over 267 traps with a total of 21 green crab. This is everything, and then this is the last rapid response totals. We have 17 males and 4 females on this last go around, with a catch per unit effort of about 7.8 green crab per 100 traps. All in all, there's 445 traps have been set in these rapid responses. 38 green crab altogether in the last 2 trapping assessments, rapid responses, 25 males, 13 females, and the catch per unit effort as accrual is 8.54 crabs per 100 traps. Yes?
There was also the public capture of one off of the Blaine fishing pier.
Get in there. I'm getting there.
Excellently anticipated. Next slide.
Yeah, so subsequent green crab sightings after these trapping events. Again, this is Drayton Harbor up here. That marina is right here, and there's a fishing pier. Oops, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So the first one was in October on the 13th. We had a report from a guy named Tony, Captain Tony, who saw a seagull dive, catch a green crab out of a tide pool with eelgrass, and then fought with some other seagulls over the crab. He dropped it, he went out and grabbed it to see what it was, and it was, in fact, a green crab, and that's a photo of it. We thought it might have been a molt or a dead crab of some sort, but apparently it was alive, and that was the color that it was. And then on November 2nd, we got a report from another public citizen who is crabbing just off the fishing pier using a ring crab pot. And if anyone knows that, that is just put in the water and then you pull it up after a little while and see what's in there. And he caught a green crab. That is the photo that he sent us there. And it does have a larger barnacle on it. And if anyone knows any studies about determining how long it takes acorn barnacles to grow, I would love to have that information.
So what's next for us? And, you know, I can talk about like sort of the open questions is really sort of mostly where we're at. The first thing is we do want some additional information. Leave it to the scientists to say that we need more information. So one of which is DFO, our colleagues on the Canadian side have done a small amount of trapping in the Boundary Bay, sort of some of the good habitat there. They did find a small number of green crab, but they've also only looked in a few locations. I'd love to see a little bit more trapping to get a wider range to see what's going on that side of the border. In addition, I mentioned some of the genetic work that we're doing. These crabs have been sampled and sent to our collaborator at Woods Hole, and hopefully by early next year we'll know, what we will know is whether or not they came from Souk Basin or the coast. And so that's sort of the next step. In learning more about what's going on. However, what I want to sort of summarize is that this is this is a more concerning finding and more complex than other Washington inland sites. There's a couple of things that bear mentioning. One is the green crabs are occupying, or we found several of them in some of the more open habitats. And I just spent a little while telling you about how they like structure. When we find them on open tide lands like that, it usually means that there are more green crab in more protective habitat. So there's somewhere where they're essentially acting as a source for green crab in those open areas where their mortality is going to be higher from predation by larger crabs. So finding them in those really open areas in the warmer months can be a little bit concerning to us. In addition, the numbers are, the catch per unit effort that Chelsea shared with you is, you know, we have the sort of global average across the Salish Sea of something about 1.5 to 2 crabs currently for every 100 traps we set. Having it be 5 times higher than that is partially a representation of the fact that not as many traps as we've set, it's not as many as have been set at Dungeness Spit, where they've set 8,000 traps since 2017. So partially, as you know, we set more traps, that CPUE will go down. However, we're also going to catch more crabs. Nevertheless, for the initial assessment, this is one of the highest CPUEs that we've had. One of the things that we see as a potential challenge that we're already working on is that is this issue of access. In places like Dungeness Spit and Macaw Bay, access is not a challenge and not an obstacle to trapping because National Wildlife Refuge owns the spit, or macaw fisheries can gain access to all of the tribal lands. However, working with a complex private ownership, community of private ownership can make it harder for sort of the logistics of getting the traps out there that need to be set to do removal work. But I think some of the history that Chelsea laid out at the beginning of the emphasis on community support for water quality and a productive shoreline in Drayton Harbor sets the stage for some really productive conversations about the work that can be done to protect the environmental and economic resources of that region, because it really will have to draw largely on the folks that are living and working in that area every day. It can't be Chelsea and me and Sean and Heather and Alex out there until the end of time. So, so removal trapping, I just want to emphasize, will require really coordinated efforts that are focused specifically on that location, and as well as access. So we want to thank the folks who've supported that particular effort, as well as you all for listening, and we can take some questions as we transition to the next talk. Thank you. Yeah.
Couple things. So since I've been environmental planner before, I've worked a lot with the Drayton Harbor Shellfish Protection District. So I think one, so in my work with the port, I've been exposed to and attended a lot of Drayton Harbor Shellfish Protection District meetings, and that's the group that's really been working up and down the watersheds and improve water quality. And so I think as far as getting access to some of this private land, working with the conservation area, they have made great inroads, and so has a lot of staff. So that'll bear out in the future as we guys try to get more access. And then I had some questions from Lane Berger staff that because they've got some interest from folks in community tracking, right, and also in some ID training. And so I'd be happy with that, making that happen and getting in touch with whomever needs feedback. There's a lot of interest. I don't know if winter's a good time to do that. Well, it's not a good time to do the tracking.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for for bringing that and suggesting that. I think we should definitely plan to. I mean, that's one of the first things that has to happen is sort of training and awareness on what things are, and then making decisions about who is available and what resources are available to do and sustain trapping efforts. So we should talk more.
We're very interested.
Yay.
And one last thing I guess about a lot is the reading I've done seems that crabs are definitely, they will feed on various life stages of different shellfish clans. What about oysters? That's the big part of economic good and all that I've heard about oysters.
Yeah, green crab aren't picky at all. They will eat anything that they can break apart. So it sort of just depends on the age of the oyster, the size of the oyster, and the shape and shell history. Sean, is there anything I should add to that?
No, I mean that's really it. I mean most sorry, I was gonna just yell. So most studies on oysters, most studies on the predation of green crab on shellfish have been done in laboratory settings, where they have limited options for disposal. And the problem with laboratory studies using oysters is just the morphology of the oysters. So variable. It's much easier to do a study with mussels or clams where the shape of the shell is not going to be so variable. They can get more consistent results. So that was the long answer. The short answer is they will eat oysters, but as Emily pointed out, it really depends on the size, the shape, and the abundance of alternative prey.
So to build a review of Taylor shellfish, and relative to that last question, we have a farm out in Local Bay as well. And at least to my knowledge, I've not heard reports from growers in Local that they're doing damage to the oysters. But again, all of the findings out there at higher title, that seems to be the niche that they succeeded in out there. Again, partly my concern that we're finding lower in sandwich. Lots of things kill our oysters. So what's a green crab? Who would necessarily know? But I'm curious about all the findings that Brady has observed in grades. Has he reported any mortalities associated with those findings in his oysters?
No one's really reported any mortalities done by green crab. There has been, I've had conversations with another DFW employee from the Willapa Field Station. In the southern end of Willapa is an oyster restoration, I believe. And there's been some evidence of possible unbone crushing, but that is just speculative, and we haven't gone out there to see for ourselves. But there are people that are talking about it in Willapa, but not confirmed.
Yeah, I think Chelsea makes a good point, which is, and Bill, you do as well, which is that crabs are already a pest essentially that, and not green crab, but other crabs that growers have to deal with and have to account for in terms of protecting all shellfish from crab predation by a lot of native crabs. And so some of those practices should be fairly effective against European green crab as well. And so it may be a matter of thinking about the timing of the green crab life cycle so you don't have larvae recruiting into bags and growing up and eating the shellfish while they're ostensibly being protected by the bags. One of the challenges and one of the things that we think will potentially be a larger impact than then maybe commercial growers who have the ability to protect harvest to some extent will be wild harvest. So, and as well as recreational harvest and conservation beds that are not just Olympia oysters, but also that are set out to facilitate populations for wild harvest as well.
This is Salish for Echo Shellfish. My question, what's the ratio of the female crab versus the male? It seemed based just by hearing your data that mostly males caught.
Yeah, absolutely. So this species, like many other species, traps bias towards males. Males are more willing to enter traps than females based on just behavior. So we don't have any reason to believe that the actual population sex ratio is that much different from 50-50, but traps are mostly more effective in general at targeting males than females. So we do know that there is this under-trapped portion of the population, and then also can vary seasonally. There will be times of the year when females are even less likely to come to traps than normal, such as when they're bearing eggs. Any crab that has recently molted or is just about to molt is less likely to come to a trap, not never, but less likely. But yeah, so we know that this bias of traps is you're preferentially removing more males than females.
Do you think the females are more sedentary than the males? And the males just search out females and food?
Do you want to, I mean, I do.
I mean, if we put like RFID tags on some female crabs and put out some arrays, you should get some data and find out exactly what kind of migration you're doing.
Sean, have you actually done sex-specific telemetry?
Well, yeah. I haven't actually ever tagged females, but I have.
Yeah, so the assumption largely from studies done elsewhere is that the males will move much longer distances than the females in general. Females, particularly when they're brooding, when they're with eggs, they won't travel at all. And if you saw the image that Chelsea showed earlier, it's because when they have eggs, they literally cannot move very, very effectively. Their legs barely touch the ground. So long answer, short answer, males move more than females, just in general. And we do have good telemetry data on the males.
And I do just want to say that from Brady's Oyster, where they're gathering the females, it is in their seed pellets. And they don't move, so they're just there. And that's how they catch them.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to our next talk, which is going to be Carl Mueller from Lummi Nation.
I'm afraid my time is used up.
No.
No.
You have my time.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see familiar faces, and I will say for 3 of you, you have seen this talk. This was a presentation I made a few days ago at our fishery co-managers meeting in Suquamish. And I really like how the team structured this workshop today, and then the timing of it. I'm just going to kind of pick up from Chelsea and Emily's last presentation there. And I have begged, borrowed, and stole some imagery from others, and I want to acknowledge this is a little map that Alan had in a little tech report he sent around to stakeholders and co-managers. And you will also see another image from the Washington Sea Grant team that I painted in Microsoft Paint. So to orient you to Lummi, we are, you can see the star at Drayton Harbor where our last talk left off. And then you can see a yellow dot on Bellingham, which is just east of the islands there. Oh, awesome. Gosh, that's what we're talking about. Oh my gosh. So here's the Lummi Peninsula right there, and Lummi Bay is just right in this neck of the woods here. And But I will, before I get into Lummy's experience, I'm going to just touch very briefly on my experience hanging out with Chelsea for a day up at Drayton Harbor. And Chelsea had reached out to us following the findings by the volunteers, which was really a fortuitous finding of the molds up there in that Drayton Harbor area. And so Chelsea extended an invitation to myself and a couple of my coworkers. My coworkers were not able to head up to Drayton Harbor, but I was able to join Chelsea in that midpoint location of hers, as well as Dakota Creek. And as was shared, green crab were found. This is the Dakota Creek site. And here's all that scary mud. And Big Boy here was kind of left it up to Chelsea to actually take those traps, because I was kind of sinking in a little too deep. So I hit the high ground and did some photo sampling myself of Chelsea's effort. And here definitely green crab were found. And then given this habitat, of course my mind was just a whir, because the Lummi Nation on its reservation tidelands has a lot of this similar habitat in spades, and quite a bit for our neck of the woods. And so following this tide series, I really wanted to get into our neck of the woods. And so that started a several-week endeavor to see what might be found on Lummi Reservation tidelands. And I'd like to acknowledge my collaborator, Nick Jefferson, who's a Lummi tribal member, earning his master's degree at Western, going to be a crustacean biologist when he's all said and done. And that will be, just to give Nick a further shout out, he will be the first tribal member to have earned a master's degree in the hard sciences, who will be working on fisheries for the tribe. So really glad to have him aboard that way. So we concentrated our effort in Lummi Bay in the Sea Pond, and this is just an aerial shot. Just Google. That's what I do. I don't do GIS. I do Google. And as you can see, not only in this picture here, but also just from the aerial, and this is just one corner of Lummi Bay. We have a lot of habitat. This lower quarter, what you see here is the sea pond. That is a feature that you can see from space. A lot of you are familiar with that. And this is the dike road that goes along it. This is Quina Road coming down through the reservation. And then to this direction is the rest of Lummi Bay heading up towards Sandy Point and whatnot. And and just as Emily pointed out, tidal marshes, the gradually sloping mud flats, and tidal channels are what we just cut to the chase and just went straight to that habitat, rather than kind of the more standard approach that covers a lot of different features along the shoreline. We also went into Portage Bay, Portage Island, which does not have as much of that sweet habitat as previously discussed, but what it did have, we hit. And this is a feature here, or a picture here, just kind of showing a neat little tidal channel that just kind of runs along the shoreline here. And this is an old man-made feature from way back when. See that crazy straight thing there? So this is our calendar again, end of September, that last week of September. And then this is Lummy's green crab crew. This is the response team, myself, Nick Jefferson here, and Daniel Washington. I spoke about Nick, and Danny is is an intern at the Northwest Indian College. He's also a longtime Lummi fisherman, and it was really great to have him come aboard for our response. And we also benefited midway through our effort with having old Chelsea not only come join us, thank you, Alan, for availing her time, and provided more equipment as well. So you've kind of heard about the protocols. We just, I'm a big believer in, harmonizing before customizing. And so why reinvent the wheel? So we just kind of used the Washington Sea Grant protocols, which are based on Barron's-Yamada work from 10, 15 years back there or so, with, of course, tweakage. And we alternated using Fukui-style traps and minnow traps, baited and set overnight in those preferred habitats. Our bait was herring and sardines. And again, kind of following those protocols, they were set overnight, and so our effort was considered a trap night or a trap set, as what we heard earlier on, just through the tide cycle. And we ended up, we set our traps on the next 3 tide series following my hooking up with Chelsea up there in Drayton Harbor. And in terms of processing our catch, spoiler alert, we found them. But so when we found our European green crab, they were, of course, identified. Great picture of that crab from Westcott Bay, by the way. It just had to be altered for ID purposes. Sexed them, and then we measured their carapace width, both the total carapace width at the 5th anterior lateral spine, and then what they call the notch width, which is the carapace width just inside of that spine. Of course, enumerated, and then our bycatch, the other species, were identified and enumerated as well. And of the several locations that we did set these traps, in Lummi Bay, we had, oh gosh, it was 7 or 8 different locations that we set traps. We found green crab at 2 of those locations, both inside the sea pond, and then up north, in the north end of Lummi Bay at Sandy Point Heights. And the next couple of slides are just a little bit of the preliminary data. We've got your carapace width frequency here, length or size frequency. The females are green and males are blue here. And like the other findings, we're looking at a couple of year classes here. Like probably the 0 age here. And then these are probably that little bit earlier age class, poking their heads out at us here. Sexes we found across Lummi Bay were even. We had 32 females, 32 males. We did see differences in kind of the traps there as well. And just a little bit of a peek at some of the preliminary data. This is the CPUE, not using the 100 trap nights, just critters per trap night at the 2 locations that we found them. So the Sea Pond in Sandy Point Heights, FKI, oh, there we go, Fukui, and then Min for minnow. And you can see that basically across the board, we were getting 1 to 2 crabs per trap in these areas. And The differences here, we're not looking at any significant difference here. There was a significant difference in catch rate in the sea pond between the two styles of traps, but I will point out that this is actually at the 10% level. If you took an alpha of 0.05, those differences go away and probably kind of weighted with these big catches we got here. But that just kind of, unfortunately, that did not bode well. It either spoke to our great abilities as field biologists and fishermen to catch critters, or it spoke of a kind of a bigger population concern. And in this table, I, again, just kind of borrowed out of Alan's tech report. And as was pointed out by Emily, these data, here's a CPE here, they're already outdated in just the few weeks that we've been kind of addressing this. And our total trap nights up in Lummi Bay were 180, and we did catch 64 green crab, as I said, 32 males, 32 females, which brought us, in terms of a CPE per 100 trap nights, 36 green crab per 100 trap nights, which puts us at a second, kind of maybe a close second behind Macaw and their experience out on the coast. These data here from Macaw are old. Sounds like they've got now quite a few more, but the CPE is only just a little bit bigger. Sounds like it was 50 or so, but this is from information that Macaw had available, maybe from about last year or so. The other locations for reference, here's that Drayton Harbor catch rate, right around 6 or 7 critters per 100 trap nights. And then as Emily and Chelsea both pointed out, we're really talking, low CPUEs for the other locations within the Salish Sea. So for our next stop, or next steps, we are, we've kind of started a local outreach and education campaign. This was an article that appeared just not long ago, just in the Lummi Nations newspaper. There's also an article that appeared in the Northwest Indian Fish Commission online newsletter. And the Sea Grant team, I think, has tapped into those now and have it as part of their shared site there. We also met with a Wazoo Extension Office staff member who is going to be helping us with some signage and whatnot, and so we'll be posting those signs on res and in various locations, which kind of describe where to go for tribal members, if they're on reservation, to contact our office, if they're off reservation, to contact the Washington Sea Grant Crab team. Again, just to kind of as has been pointed out, many hands make light work, and lots of eyes really help in this effort in terms of documenting these. Over the winter, we're going to be formalizing a springtime response, an early springtime response. Just what that will look like remains to be seen, but initially I'm kind of thinking we might kind of go along the Macaw lines and have kind of a concerted trapping effort to try to knock back those numbers, especially in the sea pond. I'll probably be reaching out to the teams, for some possible assistance that way, and/or just shared experience. One thing that's really neat that I heard in the talks this morning is the idea of community. And I will say that, the tribal communities are, they're very tight. So I fully expect that if we have like kind of a green crab trapping, rodeo, if you will. Bad pun. I can say that. I've worked for the tribe for a lot of years. You cannot. But I think we'll get a great community outpouring, that want to help out. And so I hope to kind of be working with not only staff but others locally, regionally, in the springtime. And then two, kind of review and assess possible impacts on Lummy's abundant tidelands. And some of that I'll be preparing a technical report of our efforts here. It's in the works. Hope to have that completed and out by the holidays here. And that'll be something that our Fish Commission, our Fisheries and Natural Resources Commission can sink their teeth into, my upper managers, et cetera. And then also be a way to kind of assess those possible impacts and, just kind of, sharing those possibilities with, with my higher ups. And that is that. Questions, or I also will defer it to a later time if there's whatever the program dictates.
Yeah, I think what would be good right now is just take a break for 10 minutes. We'll get back together at 11, and then we'll have a brief talk from me, and then we'll open up for a discussion. So, I need coffee. I need the lunch on.
So you didn't catch anything?
Oh yeah, and if I didn't say that, we did not catch anything at Portage, nor did we catch stuff far upstream. I totally forgot to mention that. The only place we got those green crab were kind of what you would consider sort of the outside of that very near shore area.
Around the sea pond.
Yeah, Sea Pond, and then the Sandy Point Heights, just outside of their tide gate that they have up there at that north end. Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. That's great.
Yeah, so I was like, what happened to Portage?
Great reminder.
I was like, so curious.
Great. Thank you very much again, everybody, for coming today. Really appreciate it. I think a few people have come in after the original introductions. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, Todd in the back.
I am Todd Powell with the Washington State Department of Resources, invasive species. Apologize for the late arrival. Traffic was up here this morning.
I'm Mickey McNaughton. I also work for the National Research Aquatic Invasive Species Program, the Special Projects Coordinator.
Anybody else in the room that came in a little late? And then on the online, who do we have, Sean, with your microphone?
Let's see, who do we have online? Online we have Brady Blake and also
Brady's with DFW.
Yes.
He's in our shellfish unit.
Carrie Meyer, representing the Fisheries Commission. I believe those are the folks we have online right now.
And they're hooked in, they can communicate.
Yeah, they can send comments via the chat bar and Zoom.
Excellent, thank you. So I just want to do a quick piece. This is the Salish Sea Transboundary Action Plan. It was, we worked on it with Washington Sea Grant, Puget Sound Partnership, University of Washington, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. It was formally signed by all those entities at the beginning of this year. And this is really the guidebook that we're using on how we wanted to move forward on managing green crab. Because if it's a Salish Sea management plan, Salish Sea doesn't end at the Washington State border. Green crab don't end at the Washington State border. So if we're not working with Department of Fisheries Oceans, which has the jurisdictional management of the Salish Sea, it's not the British Columbia government. It's actually DFO that has management of the marine resources. But we are making inroads with, British Columbia invasive species people as well. So, when Emily's talking about training and such, we've done outreach to British Columbia as well as DFO in trying to create some of these early detection and monitoring programs in that area, where historically what they've done is a lot of research cruises through DFO. So they've been doing a lot of trapping in those areas, and that's really given us a good information of what the risks are in those locations. So in development of this action plan, there are 6 broad objectives and 19 strategies and 67 actions underneath those objectives. So we've accomplished every single one of them, and we're looking for more actions to do. No, not really. So the number one here is collaboratively manage the response. Look across the room here and how many different jurisdictions, how many different interests are involved in this. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans, again, has the regulatory jurisdiction in Canada. The Department of Fish and Wildlife has regulatory jurisdiction in Washington State, but we also have other sovereign nations here, the tribes. We have federal lands. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the manager of Dungeness Spit. This has to be a collaborative effort. How are we going to manage these situations up in Drayton Harbor and Lummi and those other ones? Carl talked about a community. Well, how do we make sure these communities work together? We have a lot of work with the shellfish growers. We want to connect all this information so it's all leading up to, the effective management of green crab. So why are we managing green crab? Well, because we can. In this situation, all evidence is showing that, yeah, we're having larvae coming in from outside into the Salish Sea. I didn't do that.
I just put it.
Okay, there we go. Magic. So right now, all evidence is showing that the green crab that are coming in are from larval distributions from outside. So those only happen under rare circumstances when the water temperatures and we have strong enough surface winds that push larvae into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and into the Salish Sea. That's a manageable tactic. So it's sort of like a brush fire where you have little embers that are flowing in, and you can hit, see where they start sprouting, and you can send action teams in there and knock out those little fires before they become big. That's what we're trying to do right now, and I think we're being very successful in that. So in the bigger picture, we talked about, when European green crab were first introduced, we first detected them in the Washington coast in the late 90s. There was some effort, the legislature put some money forward to really start looking at the green crab, whether it was a big issue or not. That happened for a couple years. Really, the populations didn't take off, the interest waned, but we did start up early detection monitoring. And who was it that had the Padilla bag? Yeah, you had the information there where in 2001, there was the MISM, the Marine, golly, I can't even remember. Yeah, Marine Invasive Species Monitoring Network. It was a citizen-based system. So what we're finding is, yeah, citizen-based early detection monitoring is really, really effective in this. So that went until 2009. Then there was another lag. The money for us to be able to fund that went down. The interest in green crab, there really wasn't anything happening. We didn't see anything. So it sort of went on hiatus. In 2012, that's when there was the first detection in Sook Basin. And that really started getting everybody concerned, what's going on here. And so we were able to find some money, worked with Sea Grant. I don't know whether they're happy that they took on this job or not, but this was through the Puget Sound Partnerships Action Agenda. EPA Nearshore Estuary Program money was made available. So that really got Sea Grant going for the first couple years. And then we were really lucky. No, it's not lucky. We worked really hard, and we had really good support, especially from the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe and the Mackay Indian Nation to
make sure the legislatures knew that this was an important program that needed to be funded. So in 2019, the legislature did provide additional funding for these next 2 years to Washington Sea Grant to keep them going. But funding is tenuous, and this is a very big project, and we all need to work together. I'm not looking to create a million, this big program that we do everything. This can't be done just by our agency alone. We need to have it a collaborative management. I want to see these kind of regional teams, foster, take ownership of the situation, but in a collaborative way that the information moves up and we do the job we need to do. So the other thing, we don't have representatives from DFO here today, but when we saw those numbers coming in from Drayton Harbor, I was immediately on the phone to my colleagues at DFO and saying, we got a problem here. We need you to do some trapping up in Boundary Bay. They moved some of their teams that were trapping in the Gulf Islands over to Boundary Bay and did that trapping in the late part of the season, just to make sure, to collaborate on this. So we have really good connections, collaborations with Canada on this. So the other thing, another area, if you're, what can you do to help? How can we work collaboratively on this? There's a lot of different ways. We appreciate, Kurt talking about, city of Bellingham, the Port of Bellingham. There's interest out there. How do we work together? Some of those things we can say, we really need to have teams that can go out and do the trapping. But as you've seen of some of these photos, these are not easy sites. And you have to have access, permission access to get across there. Do you want to send those people out through this muck in these kinds of situations? We have to think about safety. We also need to be thinking about what other types of trapping, what other types of management are possible out there. So we're looking for collaborations on research. We talked a lot about, well, what's a good trap? Macaw Nation has done a lot of work with a lot of different kinds of traps. They're finding success in using shrimp pots, just basic, recreational shrimp pots. We're also looking at, we're talking about the shellfish growers and their stuff. Can there be a protocol that we systematically could go out there and use that infrastructure that they have and monitor those situations and look through them in a more comprehensive fashion rather than, they're just found during management types of deals. Can we develop traps that are based on habitat? When we were talking about, why do crabs go, to different places, in the wintertime? So can we use divers, for example, to go out and look for gravid females? Can we, or other species or other life stages on that? So there's a lot of different things that we can think about and we can collaborate on, and that's what I think the best part of this is. A lot of really good creative minds are in the process right now, and that's what we need to tap into. So all of this, of course, requires money, and at this point, and I don't think it's going to change radically, but it's whenever I deal with aquatic invasive species, I used to say it sort of facetiously that this was stone soup management, and I may be aging myself. Anybody, stone soup, the old story? Anybody remember that story? The soldiers going around and they had a big pot and they said, let's make stone soup. And everybody says, well, stone soup doesn't, what does that like? But everybody started bringing things into the pot. And that's what we're talking about here is, the DFW, I think we're the people that are coming out like, here's the pot. Let's start, everybody needs to bring things and add to that pot. And pretty soon it becomes something that's actually meaningful and nutritious and healthy and helps the whole product and make it work in this. So we also want to go forward with a funding package to the 2021 legislature. What does that look like? How does that money come in? How is that money distributed? Does it have to come through DFW, or can it be distributed to different entities? For example, again, the legislature gave the money directly to the University of Washington to fund Sea Grant. I'm not in it to say I've got a $10 million program. I'm in it, I wish, but I'm in it to make sure that we are successful in this. And however we can be successful, however we can do this. This is all cutting edge, folks. Nobody else that I know of has this opportunity at this stage of an invasion to do something about it. This is cutting edge, and it's going to take every one of us to figure out how to make it work. It's complex, and we can all do things to help in that. So that's really all I wanted to really talk about today. You know, the Transboundary Action Plan is a model for how some of the steps we're going to go through. I'd like to see this evolve. Again, this was built by a smaller number of people. I want to broaden that out, have people look at it. Maybe we could have a document that's signed by, you know, 50 entities rather than just 4. That would be really helpful. That's what really makes the legislature pay attention, when you have people who are saying, I agree with this. We're going to move forward on this. This is important to us. We've talked to several legislators, and they're all, their ears are perked up on this, and this is of concern. But the more they can hear from every one of us, you know, that's what they really need. That's the political capital that they're going to need to want to move this forward. Other than that, if you have any questions for me, or let's open it up for a discussion.
So other than Boundary Bay, has Canada done any trapping in their Salish?
Yeah, they've been doing extensive trapping. They've been in their Gulf Islands doing trapping there. They've trapped inland from Sook. They have found some small populations as you go from Sook towards Victoria, but it's similar to ours in the handfuls. And I guess I have to, when I think about Drayton and now Lummi, it gets bigger than a handful, but it's not anything next to what the populations in Sook Basin or on the outside of Vancouver Coast or on East Coast populations are like. When, you know, Emily was describing, they don't count them, they weigh them because there's so many. But what, you know, it may sound like, well, why are you concerned about 38 crab that you caught? You know, for us, that's a big step up in these captures. And I'm not, go ahead.
How about the eastern shore of Vancouver area?
Emily or Sean, do you know more about that?
So on the south end of Vancouver Island, the furthest in the Strait of Georgia that they've been captured is Salt Spring Island, I believe, coming around the top, Port Hardy, do you have that right? Is the furthest south, closest to Johnston Strait, that they've been captured. So there's a big gap in there where they're probably sort of bookended, having rushed to the north and the south, but not in the middle there.
I'll just also mention that most of the oddball specimens that DFO has been finding, we've been taking samples for genetic analysis to see if we can identify the source population.
I'm just curious, as a trash aspect from Salish, if you know where that original mussel population came from.
You know, I can't remember the exact location. It's somewhere on the west coast of Vancouver Island. I thought it was somewhere. What's that?
Fontino?
You know, I can't remember exactly. Okay. To be honest, I would have to go back. There is a report about that, or at least it's mentioned in the report. We tracked it down, but it was, as Emily pointed out, it was island monitoring mussels that were just transferred back into the Salish Basin.
From the farm?
No, it wasn't from a farm as far as I know. There's no farming. It was another sort of biomonitoring toxin. So using the mussels just as a source.
So, for example, our department uses mussel to look at different toxics around Puget Sound, and I've worked with them to make sure. This actually started before when there was invasive tunicates that we were concerned about. So they have very clear protocols of not taking mussels from one place and then letting them soak until they're ready to use in a different place. And so our shellfish unit has also worked with the growers to do shellfish transfer permits and looking and working closely with aquaculture to try to make sure that we're not the human mediated, the human pathways are being addressed. As you can tell, this is complex and there's a lot of open pieces here, and so we're trying to plug holes and make sure what we know as quickly as we can.
Yeah, this is Carl from Lummi Nation again. I just, for perspective's sake, I just wanted to point out that if you look at the catch rate both at Lummi and Macaw, they essentially match the peak catch rate per 100 traps in Willapa Bay 20 years ago. When Willapa had that big pulse, that big kind of explosion, if you will, which was kind of tied to oceanic conditions and climate events from back then.
Sean, can you?
Carl, that's a good point, and that's the 97, 98. That was a big El Nino. So let's remember that back then. That's actually when I started working on green crab. And of course, we had another large El Nino. It sort of coincided with this latest bout of green crabs in the Salish Sea. Let me ask a question.
Well, you've done some study about larval distribution, and so there's the question of self-recruiting populations, and why would a population in the Puget Sound be different risk potentially for larval retention than Willapa Bay?
Yeah, we've done quite a bit of modeling in Willapa Bay, for instance. That was one of our key concerns, is that we might get a self-recruiting population in Willapa Bay. Turns out with a very shallow estuary like that flushes quite a bit, you're not going to see the level of retention that might cause a self-recruiting population. For the most part, there are some pockets. But the Salish Sea is a whole different beast, and there are certainly lots of inlets where you would be able to establish self-recruiting populations, especially in the southern portion of Puget Sound. And I think largely what we're seeing on the outside of Vancouver, on the west coast of Vancouver, when we do have these deep fork-like inlets, we do see self-recruiting populations. At least that's our best guess as to what's happening out there. So we do want to be mindful about these areas that where we could see establishment of self-recruiting populations.
And is there sort of like the stepping stone thing of if there was a recruiting if there was a population in Drayton Harbor, for example, which it's a shallow basin, so there's a lot of flushing there. So the crabs that are reproducing in Drayton Harbor, if they're flushing out of Drayton Harbor, it may not be self-recruiting to that harbor, but they're not going to be going out too far, right? They're going to be staying within the Salish Sea, so it's going to be able to pepper more things. So if we can limit the larval that's coming in to really the stuff that's coming in from the outside, we have a much better chance of staying ahead of this curve. But if we start getting reproducing populations within the Puget Sound, that's a next critical hurdle that we have to deal with. There was another question.
Bill Dewey, Taylor Shellfish. So I'm really troubled to hear Carl's presentation. That was the first I heard the Lummi invasion that I heard about Drayton. And obviously we're particularly concerned about what's going on in the Salish. And I'm curious if the state has any desire to go down there and start looking more closely. I'm certainly concerned we maybe will find something similar to what they did in Lummi Bay. We have a lot of resource at stake there. On the West Coast, the one documented resource impact I'm aware of is good friends in Tamales Bay. They get green crab recruited to their clam bags. They were clams in bags.
Mm-hmm.
It has a devastating effect. They get one large crab and no clams when they pull those bags up. Salish has become a major producer of mineral clams in recent years. Really new transition over the past decade there. And I'm guessing WDFW would know this better than me, but I'm guessing it must be approaching 1 million pounds a year out there now.
Mhm.
Growing in sand under predator nets, and on the East Coast, certainly that's the resource that's been most dramatically impacted by green crab, the offshore clam industry there. We're feeling really vulnerable, and we'd like to do everything we can to participate in an effort to figure out what's going on in Salish. I know our staff met with you last summer, Alan. You know, we'd like to get more active about this any way we can. So help us do that, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife, my unit has jurisdiction over all marine and freshwater in the state. I've got 3 permanent staff that deal with the prevention side. I've got 3 permanent staff that deal with the ballast water side. That's a lot to cover for limited staff. Chelsea's position has been soft money that we're getting from the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. And the fish program I've been talking to our fish program, which is where I reside within Department of Fish and Wildlife, you know, trying to convince them that this is a big issue. But they also have big issues as well. They're going forward for a supplemental this year, trying to fill some $30 million gap in base funding that we need. So, but in all that, the fish program has provided me funds to offer a permanent position for green crab. And so we have an active job description out right now, and hoping that Chelsea will be an applicant to that, and but also encourage other people to apply to that. So the Fish and Wildlife is recognizing this is a very important issue. 2021 is really where we're going to have to make it happen, and that's going to require a lot of people coming together to talk to the legislature to explain why this is important. So between in the next few months, in the next 6 to 9 months, I'm going to be doing a lot of outreach, including to with the growers and with the tribes and other people, to say, well, what are we going to go forward to on the legislature to come up with real funding to deal with this issue in the next biennium. In the short term, it's that new position is going to be key to making the coordination of this happen. And again, we rely so heavily on Sea Grant and their crab team, not only doing the early detection monitoring with the citizen scientists, but also just they're our experts on green crab in Washington State. And they provide so many different services here. So it's in the short term, we just have to all work together as best we can to address this. And I'm open to any ideas on that. I agree. There are some hot spots here that need to be addressed first. We're here and available to the Lummi Nation to do whatever we need to do to help you in this effort. We're here to, Blaine and people up in Drayton Harbor to help. Those are really, as Emily said, they're concerning, very concerning. And if we don't address these things, those are populations, and we're just, when you say we got 38 out of Drayton Harbor in that amount of trapping, I mean, there's hundreds, perhaps thousands of green crab in Drayton Harbor right now. We're only hit a small part of that. We know based on this trapping, there's more. If you look at Dungeness Spit over three years, they've caught over 220 crabs there. And so those are areas that we want to get, because if we don't knock those populations back, they're going to be spitting out larvae next year. When we look at the size of classes of these, they're at the cusp of this year. The size class didn't look like they were a reproducing population. Next year, they will be a reproducing population. So instead of a couple hundred or 1,000, you're spitting out how many potential larvae per female logarithmically starts adding up really quickly. That's a big concern. We want to address those things. How do we address them with the resources that we have right now?
I just wanted to follow up because I'm not sure your response got at my question.
Okay.
I get it that the state needs resources.
Right.
I'm telling you that we are offering resources, our staff, our boats, our time. And we have offered that previously. You haven't taken us up on it.
Okay.
We need to take us up on it. Help us do this so it's done in a meaningful way.
Got it. As soon as I have the new position, we will be making, setting up meetings with you and setting up a protocol. Thank you so much for offering those resources. We really appreciate that.
I'm Todd Woodard, Salish Indian Nation. It's really impressive the number of tribes in the room today. I'm sure you had several others at your prior meeting as well. I think leverage the tribes to help you get that message across the legislature. I know from your time working with the commission, you know how this works.
Yeah.
I think Lummi being able to help tell the story for maybe tribes that aren't here and maybe don't understand the concern yet, the risk to cultural resources and cultural use materials in these habitats is humongous for the tribes. And that's why there's so many of us here in the room today. And through natural resource directors or those that are on the front lines of this in their communities, that can get to a tribal council, which can then get to the lobbies, which can then get to the legislature. And between tribes and industry that has that ear, let us help leverage that. Let us help craft the message. So let us know what the message needs to be. We can add the tribal and the industry layer to that and create that package that hopefully gets things moving so that we're not dealing with what you're dealing with the East Coast.
Yeah.
That scarab scene in the Mummy movie always freaks me out. That's kind of what it's like. So. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I guess, again, based on my previous experience with the commission, if we can coordinate work with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, if each individual tribe can move that up and say this is an important piece in the community, the tribal community, and whether or not you believe the commission is the right venue for expressing that, that's, to me, any way we can sort of consolidate things rather than having lots of individuals that we need to go to, it helps in the broader collaboration of it. So we're happy to work individually, but if we can work collaboratively on a larger scale, that's always more helpful.
So we have been talking about, or Roger Toller and I have been talking about doing possibly another extensive tracking survey in Padilla Bay. So in our eelgrass beds, we did that once before in the summer months. But as we see in Salish Bay, it's possible that it would be more beneficial to do an extensive trapping in winter. Also going perpendicular to the shore to get those essentially deeper spots that the crabs could be in, and using our eelgrass for shelter. So I guess I'm asking if anyone has any thoughts on that, if that could be beneficial for us to do this, another extensive trapping in the eelgrass beds, which could maybe give us more insight onto what's happening in Salish Bay. And also if we should consider doing more intensive and extensive molt surveys to get a broader range of habitat that the crabs could be in over here.
Oh, yeah, I suppose I could say something about that. I think that certainly doing more survey work is always it's beneficial to see, find new habitats that might be in and to learn a little bit more about what the crabs might be doing, particularly in the wintertime. But as Emily pointed out, one consideration is just the amount of effort that it's required to find green crab in the wintertime when you're less active. So it is a lot of effort unless you're targeting particular habitats. I do think, though, that working with shellfish growers can be really critical, particularly in the colder winter months when green crab are more frequently found associated with those habitats in deeper water.
Yeah, just a little bit to add about mold surveys. So one thing that we have seen, I think, sort of just a qualitative assessment is that we mostly find molds when crabs are already fairly abundant. So this, even in Drayton Harbor, we've seen this pattern, but the same has been true in Dungeness Stick, where they have quite a few, but we actually don't find molds on that frequently. Mold surveys are a great way to get people out, a lot more people out, and cover a lot more territory. So it can be a great way to mobilize energy when you don't have the ability to get, for instance, thinking about setting traps on an in-grass bed in the winter, you're working on nighttime tides, so there's some real safety issues as well. Your capacity in terms of recruiting bodies may be constrained, but those folks can also, folks who would otherwise be participating in that, who don't want to get out in the mud, everyone can always look for molds, but it's just important to take a result that mold surveys might be less sensitive to detections than trapping. And that said, of course, trapping is potentially seasonally sensitive in terms of attracting food as a bait versus looking through oyster pellets and other structure. So I think I would recommend if you are out in the in-grass beds in the winter, we can find small clusters of oysters that are in deeper areas, spending time looking through them and structure that might be hiding them. So that visual survey might also be an important technique to use if you're already out there either surveying in-grass or looking for setting traps.
Before we get to any other questions, I feel compelled to share something with you all because I feel like it's important. So I'm just going to share this real quickly because we've been hearing a lot about these various catchment unit efforts, and I kind of want to put this into context for those of you who are not familiar with green crab, because we were talking about the potential impacts of green crabs in time and space. And so when we hear about macaw, we hear about what's happening Lumi, that seems like very, very high CPUEs. But just to give you a little bit of context, this is a video shot in, I think it's the Great Marsh in Massachusetts. This is by Walker Creek Media. This is a 3-hour time lapse of a trap set from a region that's heavily impacted by green crab. And so when we're talking about CPUEs on this coast, I definitely, as a scientist, I don't want to just be an alarmist, but I also want to make sure that people are aware that we have an opportunity here to reduce the population before they get to a point where they create the tremendous impacts that we're seeing elsewhere. So even when we're seeing CPUEs of 50 plus per 100 trap sets, that's nothing compared to what's causing tremendous impacts on the East Coast. And we wouldn't expect to see those kind of impacts until the densities get much higher, but if we don't do anything, we have a much higher probability of that occurring. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear to people when we're talking about CPUE.
So yeah, just to follow up on that, we're running a delicate balance here. I mean, a lot of people in invasive species, they like to sort of tongue-in-cheek in some ways put up those movie posters about invasion of the green crab and people screaming and running away and stuff. And their question is, well, do we really know that they're going to take a hold here? You never know, but that's what they're invasive, and they can happen in this way. What we're trying to do is just provide you with the real information. We're not trying to scare you, but I mean, when I look at this, I get scared. I don't want to have this kind of a situation in Puget Sound. Would it happen? Is it possible to happen? Yes, it's possible. Is it going to happen? I don't really want to find out. And that's where you guys come in. You all have to make that decision of whether this risk is worth the effort that it's going to take. And it's going to take a lot of effort. But if this happens, how much effort is it going to take to mitigate this? What are the other things that it's going to impact? It's not just shellfish. All those eelgrass beds that support forage fish, that supports juvenile salmonids, and everything like that. There's a lot at risk here, but it is a risk. So that's another piece I want feedback is where you're at. And I want honest, candid feedback. I mean, earlier on, you know, I'm feeling more when the more people that I talk to, the more people that are seeing this, the more numbers that we're starting to see, I can actually sort of feel a rise in people's concern on this. But give me that feedback back. Give it back to us. Let us know. Go ahead.
So here's a little insight. If you want to do some winter traffic in Salish Bay, I know that Bill and our crews would be more than welcome to show up today and be operate at night all day long. So we could learn if we could actually set our own traps. Do we need any special permitting to do that?
Technically, European green crab are classified as prohibited level 1 species. Possession of a live green crab requires a permit by the department. I've issued permits to Washington Sea Grant and some other entities here. When we get into this, this larger scope, I need to be thinking about how best to address that permit. I don't want, what we want to be careful of is just anybody. So for example, when we talk to the public are saying, well, if I find a green crab, should I bring it home or should I just kill it? And we're going, no, mostly because they don't identify them very well. So we don't want them killing native species. But that's really the key is we say take a picture of it, which is huge, and then let it go. It's like, well, that sounds counterintuitive, but from what we've seen, we're saving a lot of native species. So the bigger question is, how do we move forward in this scale of a thing, talking about a prohibited species? And it's, at this point, my answer is yes, we want people out there trapping. We'd like to give training to you on what you're looking for so that, it's going forward. And that's going to take some time. That's going to take, working with Sea Grant. It's going to take, working with whoever's in Chelsea's position in the future. I hate saying that when she's sitting right here. It's the reality of things. But I don't know. Is that? I mean.
Catch release is okay.
Well. Please.
Tommy Hawkins with Echo Shellfish. I was a volunteer for Sound Toxin, which is also part of the Sea Grant program. They have an excellent format for volunteer network that may provide what you need as far as not only a reporting system for whatever data is collected, but also as a permitting format for us to actually be allowed to handle these prohibited crabs.
Right. So at this point, what we've said is anybody that works with Sea Grant that's within their citizen science is covered by that permit. And that may be the format here, just as long as you're sort of registered. But I need to talk to Sea Grant to see whether or not that's the way we move forward. Again, I'm willing to move forward. I know the growers are much more savvy about which species that they're finding out there. So like Brady's oysters, they don't have a permit that they're aware of. No, I don't. We haven't issued them a permit, but they collect the crabs and they hold the crabs for us. So it's not a hard and fast rule here. What I'm just trying to be careful of is making sure that people know how to identify this species. And if we're confident you know how to identify these species, we don't have enforcement officers running around, asking people to show them their green crab. So, yeah. Kate? I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Alden sketching MRC. So far, pretty much all the sampling I've seen and has been discussed here has been based on people walking out of traps and putting them out. I'm wondering if a boat-based trapping program, deeper areas, developed Bay, Salish Bay, especially during the winter, might not work, especially with the cooey.
That is basically how DFO does their trapping, is boat-based. And we've been talking about modifying and getting some traps to be able to do that for our program. I don't have a set. I'm sure we can get a protocol pretty quickly from DFO. Emily, you have some more thoughts on that?
Yeah, so both base trapping, depending on the context dependent, can be ways to access places quickly. You do not have to deal with permissions depending on where you're at. So it can in some ways streamline things. There are some real risks to boat base trapping in that if you're targeting the right elevations for green crab, that means you're setting your traps on high tide, and the traps could be exposed at low tide. So you're going to do a lot of bycatch mortality, potentially including terrestrial bycatch. That's something that, because of the way the Canadians sample, they deal with a lot more than we do. So it's a possible tool, but it's not without sort of costs in addition to the sort of added logistics of getting boats and re-rigging equipment.
There is one other tool that you can use for catching crab. Beckham worked with Dungeness crab throughout the sound. We used a 3-meter beam draw out of about a 20-foot whaler, sample all sorts of areas in the sound, including Salish, Padilla, fairly extensively. And it's fairly easy to use. It catches crab that are out moving around. And that's another possibility for research purposes, probably not routine monitoring.
Sorry.
So I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing a strong desire in the community to help and do this. I'm hearing, permit issues, which is understandable, and ID issues, and you as an agency wanting to make sure that IDs are happening properly, so we're not lightening out all our native shore crab. And I'm wondering if, those groups of citizen scientists or tribes that have been involved in the tracking for a number of times, something could be developed to sort of train a trainer sort of thing, so that folks that you are comfortable with teaching that ID skill to other folks, through a vetted process that you have, certification process, whatever, and a card that says I've passed your, then that might be a way for the community to help broaden the skill set in the face of, limited number of bodies that you guys have as an agency.
Definitely so. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, thanks. Caitlin with Washington Sea Grant. I think what I'm hearing in the room is a clear call for more capacity. You guys want to help, and so I interpret that to be, from a Washington Sea Grant perspective, that we need to figure out how to hire another Emily. Because right now we only have one Emily. We used to have Kelly Martin, some of you may know, who's a student assistant, and we're kind of in between those moments. So I hear that, and I also hear willingness to help us find the funds to make that a reality. We would like to be responsive. We want to help all of you do everything. Emily and crew are really the ones who have the ID training. A lot of this has been developed, and Emily can only be in so many places at one time. So let's work together and figure out how to make more Emily's.
So, and I think, and to reach out again, I think the shellfish growers have offered assistance. If we can work with Bill and the shellfish growers to say, let's designate a point person this is the expert, this is the person. And I know there's a few people we've already talked with, and just say this is where it funnels up for the growers, or maybe just for some growers. With the tribes, with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, maybe there's a point of contact there that could become the train the trainer. I'm just, when I hear this, I'm very heartened by it, but I'm also recognizing how much coordination effort it requires. And that is huge. We cannot discount how much that is. And so that's our challenge right now is I'm so happy to hear this interest, this concern. It's definitely elevated since even earlier this year that I'm sensing this. So in my mind, I'm trying to think, okay, what's the next step here? How do we sit down? Do we sit down with the tribes? In what venue? How do we do that? How do we coordinate? How do we consolidate? Sitting down with the shellfish industry, how do we coordinate consolidate, make sure that things are working with, you know, how do we, the MRCs and the other entities here that bring in a broader group. That's my wheels are turning on that, and, you know, thinking about the next steps. So go ahead. The next person had the mic there. There we go.
Yeah, Carl, and I just want to, I'm switching my hats here on the fisheries manager. You know, one thing to consider with an effort offered up by the shellfish industry, which is awesome, you know, Kukui style traps will definitely catch Dungeness crab. We're talking about winter time here. You know, there's a big winter Dungeness fishery. So I think if people in their thinking about the future, you will never go wrong with thinking of the sovereign tribes, if not first, a close second, and often, because of the tribes' positions within the jurisdictional structure that we have here in our state. They are up here. So please bear that in mind with, you know, with some of the efforts that, you know, that people brainstorm. And kind of along what Todd had mentioned, I'm happy to come down, Bill. I mean, and spot check whatever you guys might find in Salish Bay. Just, you know, feel free to give me a shout. I think, you know, we are in such a situation where, you know, I'm a firm believer in many hands make light work, and you know, those kinds of offers, if done in a you know, kind of a structured way that reduces the risk to you know, the bycatch for the critters that we might be, you know, concerned about, could go a long way. So thank you.
All right, thanks.
Laurel Baldwin with Washington County Noxious Weed Program. And I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. And in terms of the work that I do is with spartina, anglica, common pork grass, and in fact, the only infestation we have in Washington County is in Long Bay. And I'm sheepish to admit that I've been looking for green crabs and never seen them, which means I'm not a very good green crab surveyor. But anyway, I wanted to ask, and this may be a couple of questions. One, if anybody has found a relationship, anecdotal or otherwise, between the spartina frequency and green crab infestations. There's an enormous amount of data for spartina locations through the Department of Ag, you probably know. And also, if I'm assuming that the Department of Agriculture crews and WCC crews that are working on spartina are also being trained in green crab, maybe? Does anybody know? That is a great resource as well.
We were just having that conversation.
Oh. So
did you have a comment or?
Saying that we're talking about training the WCC group.
Talking about training this group. Yeah, so in terms of my own past research out in Willow Bay, that was spartina flora out there, which grows deeper into the intertidal. There's certainly a relationship there. In fact, one that we could statistically find, and that the green crab out in Willow Bay were using that as a preferred habitat type, and that has certainly changed the dynamics out in Willow Bay in terms of where green crab are found now. Spartina flora has been reduced to such a great extent. In terms of ag, I don't know that there's anyone who's done a specific study looking at relationship there.
I wanted to thank for the comment about WCC crews in particular. So through the aquatic reserves, there is Puget Sound Corps has a team that each year is trained to monitor 2 sites as part of the crab team network. But we've also been talking about specifically targeting folks in the Salish Sea who are doing spartina work, and also leveraging some of the capacity of WCC in general to think about more trapping sort of, I don't know, boots. I use the phrase boots in the mud over too much, but you get the idea of sort of a crew that have, you know, hidden smoke jumpers going in and being able to exert a lot of effort for a short period of time and moving around the state. Really.
Yeah, that's sort of the method that we've been using is we have a lot of people out there monitoring, early detection monitoring, and we have a hit. Then we bring in the hot shot crew, the people that really know how to set out the traps, Chelsea and Emily and Sean and others, and really saturate that area. That's a different type of management, and that takes a different kind of training and equipment and coordination and such. That's a next level of training, and that's a next level of contingency that we'd be like to recruit and make sure we have. And again, I know Bill's group has offered, especially in that area, the rapid response and those resources. The challenge is these things happen so quickly, and then we try to, put things together. As we can develop this program more comprehensively, I think we'll be able to utilize those assets a lot more efficiently.
I'm concerned that there appears to be a likely reproducing population on Lummi. You have all year classes, and my question for you is if Lummi is willing to let state crews come on for rapid response, would the state be willing to provide those services on reservation on it?
Definitely. And, Chelsea's already been there, work. So that's my world is, it's your land, it's the tribe's land. You need to invite us on, but we're here and ready to help.
Bill Dewey again. So a couple of questions and a comment. Two questions I've heard asked that I didn't hear a direct answer to. One was, does the department have any plans to do any efforts in Salish? And the second is to Elliot's question about whether we actually need a permit to do traffic.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm spacing her name, Erin. I did give it a permit to Erin for Taylor Shellfish.
For traffic? For we have a permit so we can have in our possession.
That's the same thing. The trapping is not an issue. You don't need a scientific collection permit. You just need the aquatic invasive species permit. So Erin has that permit for Taylor Shellfish, and specifically to working with you on Salish. I know Chelsea has mentioned that many times, and unfortunately, we've had these other hot issues like Drayton Harbor pop up, and so it's more of a trying to triage what we can do and where we can do it and when we can do it. But I'm hearing it very clearly, and within the context of what we're dealing with in this situation, this corner of the state is a hot zone in my mind that needs immediate work, and that work should start occurring as soon as possible this winter and not wait till the spring. So we will be working with you on a plan for Salish and offering assistance, and we'll be talking with Carl Moore on specific on the Lummi reservation land and the lagoon, as well as working in Drayton Harbor. That's going to be challenging, but as long as we have the interest, and I'm very encouraged by that.
So my comment is it would seem like with a minimal amount of training, you've got Enco and Taylor both willing to deploy traps, we're out there every night on both sides.
Right.
We're transiting perpendicular to the shoreline out to our beds.
Yep.
It would be easy for us to train up just a few people on identification and traps and collecting the data and do that every night, all winter long. It's a tremendous resource that we have to offer there.
Absolutely.
Our eyes on and can fill a gap in the knowledge as far as what's going on.
Absolutely, and that's one of the areas where I'm most concerned about, and thinking that we can have the most effect is if we can find those gravid females, if there are gravid females out there. I think we did find one in Salish, gravid female. If we can find a technique for really focusing in on that, of either attracting females that are gravid that want to hunker down in an area to identify those. It's the methods that we're using right now of a baited trap. I'm not sure. There's some experimentation we need to do, whether that's going to be effective, or how do we focus on the specific infrastructure that's unique to shellfish growers that we're finding concentrations, and can we develop a protocol that really goes through those and picks out the crabs more effectively, that if they're a gravid female, even if you have a baited trap right next to it, they may not even be physically able to move to that trap. So those are some of the questions that I'm thinking about this time that we can go through in a more conservative follow-up meeting about strategy. You're there, you've offered, I hear it, I appreciate it, and it's gonna happen.
That was all the comments, folks here. Great. The only thing I would say, and this gets to Bill's point as well, is, you know, from an invasive species control perspective and from a population dynamics perspective, the females, particularly the females with eggs, have the highest impact. And so really concentrating on that sort of effort is going to be incredibly useful. We have, from what we've seen, probably 2-year classes. This latest, the crabs that Chelsea and Emily were talking about in Drayton Harbor, and most of the crabs that Carl was talking about, those are from this latest year class. And so those crabs will be moving into deeper water. Females will be carrying eggs over winter. So any opportunity we have to remove those visuals would be very valuable, and continue trapping and stuff like that would be extremely helpful as well. I think that Jen had something to say.
Not much. I was just going to say, if you're interested in part of this conversation, including Canadians, we have a session with the Salish Ecosystem Conference next April at New Year's meeting out in Vancouver. We may keep an eye out for a green crab session there. You get to hear some of the similar topics here, but more of a discussion of the climate elements of Canada there.
Excellent. So thank you again very, very much for coming today. Great discussion. I'm very heartened by the interest and the offers for help, and we will be following up with this, again, recognizing we all have limited capacity as we move forward on this, and but this is an important effort for us all. Thank you. Safe travels home.